In all my time doing YouTube, I don't think I've ever gotten more requests to review something than Amazon Prime's The Boys. And the only reason I haven't talked about it before was because I didn't have Amazon Prime. But in December, with Christmas approaching, I decided it would be convenient to get it for easy online gift shopping, and lo and behold, there The Boys finally was, just waiting to be watched. So, long story short, I watched it, and now I'm gonna review it. Pretty simple. Spoilers for both seasons. I'm talking about season 1 first, and then season 2. Spoilers for everything. Let's just get right into this. So, yeah, I can see why everyone wanted me to talk about this. This show is awesome. One of the main things I really love about The Boys is the premise, which is also a credit to the comic it's adapted from. But also the execution here is absolutely perfect. We've seen darker superhero stuff before, twisted superhero stuff where maybe the superheroes are actually the bad guys in this situation, but the way this show takes a premise like superheroes are generally terrible people and develops it into its own very specific story and fascinating world is what makes the show stand out. For one, there's nuance in that not all superheroes are bad and all non-superheroes are good. Some are good, there are moral gray areas in which quite a few of them operate, where they do some good things and some bad things, which helps to make it not just a one-dimensional premise. And secondly, the whole corporate aspect of it I also found really interesting, with superheroes not really doing hero stuff, but mostly just being PR and advertising for products for a larger company. It adds another layer to the premise, while also leading to some really funny moments. The show also does a good job of making it feel like this is what superheroes could actually end up being like in the real world. With the merchandising and how, realistically, they could all be horrible people behind the scenes, with a lot more skeletons in their closet than they let on, reflecting a lot of industries and corporations in our world. And the whole bureaucracy and political aspect of Vought wanting superheroes to get into the military is also a very interesting and realistic angle to tackle superheroes from, as that would probably happen if they existed in the real world. The show is also a great parody and satire of superhero stories, while in itself telling a great superhero story. The parody oftentimes isn't very subtle, like The Seven is just very clearly the Justice League, but it's not really meant to be subtle. It draws very intentional comparisons to characters like Superman and The Flash and Aquaman to subvert expectations by twisting those types of characters that we're used to seeing in a certain way and putting them in this much darker story. And even beyond that, making fun of superhero movie tropes like female superheroes having unnecessarily skimpy outfits is also a funny and interesting way to parody superhero stuff. Can't believe I haven't talked about the cast yet, but it's pretty perfect. Everyone gives great performances. I like everyone here a lot, so I won't go through each cast member, but the standouts for me are probably Karl Urban, Anthony Starr, and Chance Crawford. Crawford just plays this stupid, awful, pathetic, and yet, by the end, almost sympathetic character really perfectly. I will say, I think the deep subplot in this season, while it does play into the next season, feels a bit unnecessary at times. Like, those scenes are pretty funny, but by the end of the season, before watching season 2, it left me thinking a bit, alright, what was really the point of that? And even after watching season 2, I think some of that could have still been maybe cut down, or tied a little more into the main story. But, back to my point, I think the performance is fantastic for that character. Karl Urban puts in the performance you'd expect, a terrific, fun, Jack Sparrow-ish, but darker and more British performance. He's hilarious, you couldn't have cast this role better. And finally, Anthony Starr, who was clearly the result of a government experiment to fuse Chris Pine and the guy who played Lucius Malfoy together, is absolutely phenomenal. Honestly, I think he should get an Emmy nomination. It's that good. I know some people will think that's ridiculous and I'm just saying it because it's a superhero thing and I like superhero things, but this is honestly up there with one of my favorite TV performances. A character like this on its own isn't really anything that new, a person who has a front of being all smiley and great and is secretly crazy and evil and all that, but Starr plays it so well and makes it so much his own. That, along with the writing, of course. Firstly, that switch, almost sociopathic, from patriotic superhero to narcissistic, powerful monster, is chilling to watch sometimes. He plays both sides of that so well. Even in his fake public persona, you can see the real Homelander underneath it. And then also the weirder side of him. Like, I know this is from season 2, but it's my favorite example. When he says this line,
"You know, I had a great breakfast with your wife this morning. Pancakes. Delicious."
The way he's not just totally evil and scary, but there are these layers to him of cruelty, and he takes pleasure in being this way, and also just his weird quirks and moments, make him one of the most fascinating superhero villains I've ever seen. I guess quite literally a superhero villain. And yeah, he is also absolutely terrifying. And then the way they build on his character and slowly reveal more about why he's like this, and then there's his, relationship with Stillwell. It's just an absolutely brilliant character brought to life by a brilliant performance. Also, speaking of an idea that's kind of cliche but done well here, the ideas of a ragtag team and Butcher's hardened, badass, joke-cracking guy aren't the most original, but the way this show executes them and puts its own twists on them is what makes them still really effective here, and there's such great chemistry between the boys' team. They have a very fun dynamic. Huey and Starlight are great together as well. Again, everyone puts in a really good performance here. Black Noir's little gags and moments are hilarious. And also, in my notes here, I just wrote at the end, Giancarlo shows up, goddamn, which I suppose means I was happy when he showed up. That dude is in every show I'm watching right now. It's kind of crazy. Generally, the show is very well written, it's hilarious at times, the more genuine character moments work quite well, there are good character arcs here and engaging conflicts and motivations, especially with the Huey-Stargirl storyline, and Huey's conflicting ideas with Butcher that are explored even more in Season 2. The moral questions as well that the season raises for its characters, especially with Stargirl, are fascinating to explore as well. One criticism that could be leveled against this show is its lack of subtlety, and I'm not talking in its action scenes or violence or whatever, that's all great and fits the tone of the show very well. I'm talking more about some of the political commentary, which I found interesting most of the time, but sometimes it was a bit too on the nose, and occasionally in trying to establish some characters as unlikable, the show goes a bit over the top. Plus, some expository dialogue sometimes is a bit overacted and too in your face. However, it didn't really affect my enjoyment of the show that much, since A, those moments are few and far between, and B, the show on the whole is quite over the top, so when it goes a bit over the top with that, it's not like it absolutely comes out of nowhere and is extremely distracting and a total departure from what the show otherwise does. However, it did still bug me occasionally. The show has good twists throughout, and just generally, the way the show develops its plot points and you slowly learn more about these characters in this world is really well done, specifically with the whole Compound V situation and Butcher's character. I also enjoyed that the characters feel natural and real, like in the final episode, Butcher and Huey have that argument and it ends how it ends. It feels more real than they just make up for the sake of some heroic team-up at the end. The other subplots, like with A-Train, are all quite compelling and tie into the overall story pretty well. At a certain point, the show did start to feel a bit unfocused because there were a few too many plot lines going on at the same time. Like, I almost forgot about Huey altogether at one point. But generally, the way it builds up to things and ties it all together is very satisfying. The world building is also fantastic here, and seeing these more dark uses of superpowers and dark versions of basically superhero characters that we know, or different twisted versions of maybe what would happen if they were in the real world, like the guy with the Mr. Fantastic abilities, or the Gecko guy who uses his powers for, well, you know, this stuff, or Haley Joel Osment being a washed-up child star, or anything in that nightclub. It's a fun way to parody the superhero genre, and the rest of the world with its superhero mania is also well established. The show is also extremely R-rated and brutal and dark at times, which is pretty shocking, especially initially, but also pretty awesome for most of it. Like, just in terms of action scenes, it's exciting and crazy seeing superhero action that maybe we're used to seeing, like Laser Eyes, have these R-rated consequences. I would say the killing of Haley Joel Osment and the guy who got his face sat on to death, those would probably be the most brutal kills for me this season. But the darkness isn't just for fun, crazy action. It's also shown in something like the airplane scene, which is genuinely quite harrowing and distressing, and the fact that the show doesn't pull any punches makes that scene as effective as it is. The effects are generally quite good, the costumes are very good, mostly, except for some like A-Trains that to me look kinda cheap. You settle into it, but initially, I thought maybe it was supposed to be like that as part of the commentary on superheroes, but most of the other costumes, especially Homelander's, are really well done, so it feels less intentional. The show is well shot, has a great soundtrack, good production design. I generally really enjoyed the darker color grading, which helps juxtapose this show to the typical bright superhero stuff we're used to, although sometimes it's so dark or sepia toned that it actually gets a bit distracting. And as far as the action goes, I really liked most of it. What I enjoyed was A, it was brutal and awesome. B, there were, again, creative uses of superpowers. Like the translucent fight in episode 1 was very fun, using blood to see him, or using the baby with laser eyes as a weapon. And C, the stakes and characters involved make you care about the action, which makes it more tense. Also, this isn't really an action scene, but seeing Butcher and Homelander face off at the end was so awesome. Not just from a character arc and motivation standpoint, but also because of how unrelenting they both are. Homelander is so cunning and evil, and Butcher is so tough and determined and unfazed, as we also see in some of their meetings in Season 2. It's like an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. I love it. Anyway, my problems with the action are that a bit of it is somewhat underwhelming, and some is quite poorly lit or edited, like the end of Episode 5 fight is pretty dark, and Maeve's training in Episode 3 is really badly edited. But the thing that's so great about this season is that besides those two examples, you don't really notice that the action might be a bit lackluster sometimes, or that there isn't actually that much of it because of what I mentioned earlier. The characters involved, and plus the brutality of it, keeps it interesting. I'm assuming this show's budget was used more on other stuff like actors and making all of these effects look really good. And so with that in mind, I think the action they do get in here generally is done quite well, and it's done quite cleverly to sneakily hide some of the constraints of the budget, like for example the use of Starlight's powers. And to be fair, most of the action we do get is pretty kick-ass. And I also like that I was actually watching the show for the fun, interesting story and world and characters, and not just for the action, which makes these crazy brutal moments that it does have like a cherry on top. A very dark, gruesome cherry. So all in all, The Boys Season 1 is badass, fun, well-made, and just awesome. It's exactly as advertised. It's an over-the-top, violent, funny superhero satire with great performances. It's a bit James Gunn, Matthew Vaughn-esque in a few ways. It's a fun, exciting mix of storylines that come together in a pretty satisfying way, with some solid emotional character arcs and moments at its core to keep it all grounded, and very likable characters, and it is absolutely a show that keeps you hooked. This is the first show in a while where I wasn't like, okay, yeah, I'll watch the next episode. I was like, I want that next episode. Now. Right now. I only had a few minor complaints. I'm gonna give The Boys Season 1 a 9 out of 10. And here's how my rating system works for those who are unaware. Alright, on to... Wait, actually, before we get to Season 2, I recently mentioned that some of the fans of the pod started a BHL Hudson Reddit page, and I have a fun idea for it. If you have something you want me to talk about, some piece of movie news, or a movie that you want my thoughts on, or just something you want me to see, then post it on the BHL Hudson Reddit, and I'm thinking at the end of my videos, I'll do a short little segment where I go through it. It's a way to make this a bit more interactive, and I think it'll be fun. Won't be at the end of every video, but maybe every other, or something like that. So yeah, post on the BHL Hudson Reddit, link down below, and I'll check it out in a video. Let's try something a little new that I totally haven't taken from PewDiePie and KSI and every other YouTuber. Alright, back to the video. To be honest, I don't think this part of the review will be as long as the first part, because I think Season 2 does pretty much everything I said about Season 1 just as well, more or less, or all of the more basic, general stuff that I talked about. So keep all of that in mind, and now I'll just talk about some stuff specific to Season 2. The main one being the new addition to the 7, Stormfront. Stormfront might be the most unlikable TV character since Ramsay Bolton. I can't really think of another TV show where I was just waiting for a character to meet the most grisly of ends. And that's a credit to the writing and the performance by Aya Cash. When the character first showed up, she made some decent points about the fakeness of Vought's PR style and its inauthenticity, but I still found her very unlikable. She was so pompous and smug and, yeah, just awful. And then it's revealed that she's a super racist, and then that she is a literal Nazi, and yeah. Take an irritating character and make them a Nazi, surefire way to make them one of the most hateable characters ever. And then the way she tries to turn Becca's kid against her, I was just waiting for the show to do what it does best and give her a brutal death. And while maybe it could have been worse, her getting exposed for being terrible to the world, getting beat up by Stargirl, Maeve, and Kimiko, getting stabbed in the eye by Becca, and then getting absolutely incinerated by Ryan, yeah, that's pretty solid. But in terms of in the larger context of the show, she contributes to a really interesting new storyline with the twist of Vought's Nazi-tied origin. The whole story with her and Homelander is interesting and reveals some more about his character and is darkly funny at times. And again, having a character to hate throughout a show keeps you engaged because you want to see them face justice and get their comeuppance. Also, the political commentary of this season, while again, not very subtle, I think is actually quite well done. A lot of times when movies or shows try to do political commentary, it can end up feeling a bit cringy or pandering, but the show I think drew parallels to what's happening nowadays in a pretty solid way that still actually fit naturally with the show's story. Also, the whole idea of memes being used could have been really cringeworthy, as a lot of movies or shows often are when trying to relate to internet culture, but it actually wasn't. So, points for that. Giancarlo Esposito is great this season. Couldn't have found a better pick for someone to play a character that'll stand toe-to-toe with Homelander and not even flinch. You want a calm, intimidating badass? You call Giancarlo. Also, Lamplighter being Shawn Ashmore. I think they did this on purpose, but yeah, he's quite good in this season too. In terms of the story, there are lots more compelling storylines and conflicts here, just like Season 1, with pretty much all the characters, the main ones, and then more side characters, like A-Train's is quite interesting. Huey and Starlight are again good, although Huey almost isn't the main character anymore. The show doesn't really have a main character, but again, it handles that so well that it only very rarely starts to feel a bit overstuffed and unfocused. Also, Starlight's dynamic with MM and her dynamic with Butcher are fun to watch develop. The whole Compound V reveal leading to an identity crisis for superheroes is also a fascinating thing to explore. And this might be a relatively minor subplot of the season, but the conflict between Maeve and Homelander I also thought was excellent. The way she was terrified he would hurt Elena, but then instead he uses her sexuality for publicity and PR in a way that she finds demeaning and awful was another unique way to show Homelander's cruelty. The deep storyline is solid, although again, sometimes feels a bit too detached from the main narrative, and especially when the Talking Gills bit came on, I was like, why are we spending so much time on this? It does tie in eventually, and quite a few of those scenes are funny, and I like that they develop his character more. I do just think that some of these scenes could have maybe been cut down. And the resolution to his character this season was pretty unsatisfying. I feel like he ended up basically in the same place he started, more or less. Which, I guess, is the point in a way, but given that I already felt some of those scenes could have been cut down, as a viewer, it makes those scenes that I felt were a bit pointless feel even more unsatisfying. I did enjoy the way they expanded this world more in this season though, with the Church of the Collective and also the Asylum. The Kimiko's brother storyline, I think the ending of it and the lesson that Frenchie learns is quite good, but the rest of it felt a bit rushed in its development, and so it led to some emotional moments between Kimiko and her brother falling flat for me. He felt more like a plot device than an actual character sometimes. And also, while I'm complaining about things in a show that I otherwise really loved, the show does kind of play fast and loose with how much Vought and the supers and the government can see and track. Like, it goes from hiding out, and anyone can be listening, and Homelander can hear anyone, and Vought is always tracking you, to, hey, let's just meet in a very public park and hang out for a bit in plain sight of pretty much anyone. The action, I'd say, is better this season. Again, the show does a good job of working with what it's got, pretty cleverly hiding any budgetary constraints for the most part, so it still feels natural, and there is some larger scale action that's pretty spectacular here. I feel like the show allocates its budget really well, avoiding showing certain things in some action scenes in a way where it's not too distracting, and then having really big action moments be excellent. The whole deep chase is pretty great and has a hilarious ending, and the action at the end of episode 3 is quite good. Generally very good effects, and again, you care about the people involved in the action, which makes it so much more compelling. Plus, there's a lot of tension, because in this show you feel like anything could happen. Like, it could kill off a major character, or something really brutal could happen because the show doesn't pull its punches on brutality. Also, this moment, just absolutely awesome.
Eat this motherfucker.
Again, it's so badass seeing Butcher standing up to this super powerful, terrifying villain, and still keeping his wit and personality and just being completely unfazed. Butcher is still great, and his storyline with Becca is genuinely emotional. There's probably more emotion in that storyline than anything in the first season. It's a fascinating conflict of him having to decide whether to accept Homelander's son for the sake of Becca, and how to deal with all that, and his own morals, and if he's gonna lie to her, and if he's not, and how he's gonna do all of this. And when they have that scene in episode 4, goddamn, it's like a dagger in your heart. Really well done characters and relationship there. And the whole Homelander son angle is well done too. The show is genuinely harrowing and tense in those scenes, because it's established his character and what he's willing to do, so you're on the edge of your seat for a lot of those scenes. Also, Homelander's son, actually really good child acting here. Also, kind of random note, but I love that the show is somewhat realistic in the public perception of Vought and supers and all that, because it would be quite annoying if, with everything that happens in the show, the boys are the only ones who are aware that Vought is bad, and the public is just like the adults from Derry and It. Don't have a clue what's going on, just don't really see anything. But here, the fact that things like videos of Homelander lasering someone getting leaked and the Compound V thing becoming public knowledge actually have consequences with legal ramifications and public outrage is really satisfying, even if Vought usually does find a way to weasel out of it. It makes it feel more like a real world. I guess I just noticed it because I was worried it wouldn't go that way and those things just wouldn't have consequences, so I'm glad that they do in the show. I'm a little conflicted with how the season ends, because more or less, for all intents and purposes, this could be the end of the show altogether. I mean, yes, there are some things set up, and that twist at the end that Newman was the one blowing people's heads up is intriguing, but everyone else kind of gets a happy ending, or some kind of resolution. The charges are dropped against the boys, MM and Frenchie get sweet endings, Huey and Starlight have a nice ending, Butcher doesn't exactly get a nice ending, but it in a way wraps up quite a few of his arcs at once. Homelander is at bay thanks to Maeve's video, so hey, I am absolutely a sucker for a happy ending, so I did enjoy that, and I'm assuming they were maybe covering their bases in case something happened and they couldn't get a season 3. But if a season 3 is coming, I'm not crazy excited for it from a plot perspective. Like, obviously I'm very excited because I love the show, but in terms of things left unsolved or ongoing plots or questions, not a ton here. But hey, in general, a good ending to a great season of television. This season, compared to the first, I feel was a bit more inconsistent. I feel like the first season was great all the way through. This one, at its best, was even better than season 1, but then its shortcomings were worse than the bad stuff of season 1. But I really loved watching it. I can understand when some people say it's a bit juvenile or feels a bit like it was written by teenage boys, like, oh, wouldn't this be badass if this happened? But A, I think it has a lot more to offer beyond that, and B, I am a teenage boy, and I do think those kind of moments are awesome. And this is the best possible version of that, with lots of good writing and solid character conflicts built around that. So all of that ends up with another nice 9 out of 10. Another great season of TV, a great show, looking forward to season 3. So, those were my thoughts on The Boys, finally. What do you think of the show? Let me know all of your thoughts down below in the comments. While you're at it, be sure to like this video, check out my Instagram and Twitter at BHL_Hudson, check out this podcast about movies and TV and whatnot I do with a friend of mine, it's called The Poorly Planned Podcast, and subscribe for more videos like the one you just watched. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.